back, true believers and all you merry Marvelites, as well as all you spectacular Spidey fans out there, to another very interesting episode of Marvel's Avengers 101. And lo and behold everyone, but today is finally the day where the Marvel's Avengers beta officially goes live for everyone who managed to pre-order the game on PlayStation 4. This day has certainly been a long time coming, and even though I once again am still reserving my expectations to see what exactly the beta has in store, I still am rather excited to actually try it out for myself and finally play online with all of you who are willing to join me. And just as a heads up for any of you who might be interested, I will in fact be live streaming my playthrough of the Marvel's Avengers beta once it does go live at 9 PM Pacific Standard Time. And if you're someone who wants to squad up with me while playing the beta, simply look up the name Evan Filarca so that way you can send me a friend request if you do want to play the beta together. And while I'm well aware that I have been heavily critical towards this game, it's all because I'm hoping for the best possible product that the developers can muster. But even with all of that in mind, I still think we're going to have a decent amount of fun throughout this entire weekend. Now moving on to the news itself, after the major announcement occurred indicating that Spider-Man will indeed be featured within the roster of Marvel's Avengers heroes exclusively on the PlayStation platforms, we did manage to receive an entire response from the head of Crystal Dynamics himself, Scott Amos, where in that case, Scott tried to shed some light on the whole matter by trying to reiterate exactly what is going on between Marvel and Sony relating to the Spider-Man deal exclusively on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. And even though some people may have mixed feelings about Scott's statements, I still think he did a fairly decent job trying to explain it to all of us wondering exactly how this deal came to be. But luckily enough for us, Scott wasn't the only developer from Crystal Dynamics to speak out about the Spider-Man deal. So this particular news comes directly from a website called WCCFtech.com, where they had a massive interview about Marvel's Avengers discussing almost everything that you can think about, primarily relating to the content that you can expect to be featured in the game after we beat it, the overall amount of polish that the developers are trying to apply for the game come release, and of course, the main highlight which we're going to be discussing in this video is none other than Spider-Man's inclusion within the world of Marvel's Avengers. And while Scott Amos tried to thoroughly explain Spider-Man exclusivity to the PlayStation platform, I do think that the other two developers here of Sean Eskai and Vince Napoli did do a much better job going over that specific deal, as well as providing some very interesting insight as to exactly what type of game elements we can expect for Spider-Man's character to be added within Marvel's Avengers once he is included in early 2021. And in case you're unaware as to who exactly the developers are in this interview, we do have a lot of interesting points coming from the creative director of Marvel's Avengers, Sean Eskai, and the game's main combat designer, Vince Napoli. So to begin with a flat-out question heading directly towards the game's creative director, the interviewer goes on to state, "Can I ask about Spider-Man?" which has had a quite intensely negative reaction to the exclusivity, and I'm wondering if that has been a surprise to you, and if you have anything to say to those that are particularly aggrieved by that exclusivity. And as Sean replies, the Spider-Man topic is very delicate. It's above us in terms of the relationship between Marvel and Sony. We really don't have much to say in that. We're excited about putting our version of Spider-Man and having that version of Spider-Man live in our world, which is very crucial for us. Other than that, I can say that Spider-Man will have his own story arc, and villains that may accompany it. For the time, that's probably all I can say about it. So like we know already, every single hero that is included within Marvel's Avengers will feature their own unique narrative which builds upon a larger story. This also directly relates to Hawkeye, Spider-Man, and any other character that is included post-launch. Although, the one thing that sticks out the most to me within this statement is the fact that each new hero will include their own villains to be accompanied with said story. Now, we did get a slight confirmation about that when Hawkeye was revealed, but knowing that the exact same thing is going to apply for a character like Spider-Man just has me extremely excited. Now, we will dive into the character-specific narrative inclusion a little bit later within this interview, but all I'll say for now is that if they are going to choose a specific Spider-Man villain to be attached to Spidey's narrative, then I personally really hope that it's a villain that we have not seen appear within that of Spider-Man PS4. I think it would be a bit weird if we were to get the same type of villain that we already experienced in that game show up again here in Marvel's Avengers. So for me personally, I really hope that we don't see any version of Doc Ock within Marvel's Avengers, but instead a character that is pretty big within Spider-Man's villain roster that didn't show up within Insomniac's game. And whether or not that relates to massive heavy-hitting villains within Spider-Man's rogues gallery, like that of Venom, Green Goblin, Carnage, Sandman, or anyone else of the sort, I am just extremely curious to see exactly how Spidey's narrative will play out within the Marvel's Avengers world. And again, seeing seeing that all this content is exclusively locked for one character on one specific platform is just crazy to say the least. And to elaborate upon that a bit further, the interviewer asks Sean, many of those angry fans have also pointed out that you won't be able to meaningfully include Spider-Man in the ongoing story since he cannot appear at all on PC, Xbox, or Stadia. Can you comment on that? And as Sean states rather secretively, without obviously giving any spoilers, the window where you will see our version of Spider-Man will fit into our story. Again, I have to obviously dance around it because I can't speak to it. But just know that this is our Spider-Man. He'll be in our story and will fit in that world. Sort of in that gap what happened at A-Day and between then and now. Even the villains that support that will kind of speak to how he belongs in this world and how long he lives in this world. And as the game's combat director Vince Napoli went on to elaborate further on Sean's statement, Spider-Man is an addition to the arc and progression of the main story as well. There was no swapping or anything else in that line. We've got our plan, we've got our heroes that are coming out, and the stories and the challenges and the gameplay escalation that we've planned out. That's all continuing as planned. And then just on top of all that stuff, we've also got Spider-Man now. And you know he's weaving into that. That is the key. There is no swapping or changing anything to kind of accommodate that. He's got to fit within the massive plan, and all of that stuff we've already got. He is sort of a, hey, you know, Sonya, like, hey, can you add this on top of it as a sort of a cherry on top of that? But he doesn't affect or change that in any way. That plan is still moving forward as originally planned, and conceived with all the original expansion stuff in mind. So to put all of that into a better perspective, think about it like this. Both PlayStation 4 and Xbox owners will have to pay $60 for the base price of Marvel's Avengers if they decide to buy the game at launch. And even though Spider-Man is going to be exclusively on the PlayStation platform later down the line, both consumers are still paying full price for all content to be featured at launch for the base game of Marvel's Avengers. It just so happens that Spider-Man's inclusion within the game is seen like that of an overall addition to what Marvel's Avengers already entailed. So while Xbox and PC owners won't be able to experience Spider-Man when playing Marvel's Avengers, you won't be missing out on anything that is integral to the core story of that game's universe. And while Spider-Man will have his own story, it won't matter all that much within the grand scheme of things to the overall plot that Marvel's Avengers is telling. As it states right here within the interview, is it fair to say that it will be kind of a self-contained story arc for Spider-Man in Marvel's Avengers? Where Sean simply replies with, absolutely, yeah. Again, this is nothing but solid business coming directly from Sony Interactive Entertainment and PlayStation themselves. So while there has been quite a lot of backlash towards the developers for including Spider-Man, it's not necessarily them they have to take up the problem with. But instead, it was directly clarified from Sean himself, indicating that the entire reasoning behind this deal is coming directly from Marvel and Sony. And the developers themselves of Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal are simply lucky enough to actually include Spider-Man within their game. Once again, as the article states, I think a lot of people are kind of venting at Square Enix and Crystal Dynamics as well. To clarify, is it something that was basically gifted to you by Marvel and Sony? That they were like, actually, you can use this character on PlayStation if you want to. And as Sean goes on to say, I don't know the details of it. Again, that's above us. But I will say that's really just a relationship between Marvel and Sony, and we love having Spider-Man. So we jump at any opportunity to have him. But you know, there are rules on this. And to add a bit more context to this, it was confirmed shortly after the Scott Amos interview took place that it turns out Spider-Man will be the only exclusive character to be featured within Marvel's Avengers on any singular platform. So no, there won't be any types of exclusive heroes to be included within Marvel's Avengers on the Xbox, PC, or Google Stadia versions of the game, but instead, Spider-Man will be the only character exclusively tied for Marvel's Avengers on the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 systems. And while I thoroughly understand why so many people are frustrated with this, I still think it all is just a matter of business, straight and simple. Now, as the interview continued, both Sean and Vince started to stray away from answering any questions pertaining to the whole Spider-Man situation. But still, they did manage to answer some questions relating to new heroes added into the game, which in this case can also be applied for Spider-Man since he will be a new hero added within the roster in early 2021. And after reading what they had to say, it surely got me a bit more more interested to see exactly how this will all play out come launch. So, the interviewer went on to ask some very interesting questions about what types of other heroes we can expect to see in the game besides Spider-Man, as well as learning more about the exact comic history that these characters could be drawn from. And to begin with the latter question, which does provide some very interesting answers, I think it's safe to say that Marvel Comics has got a pretty big reputation for being very white through its history. But it's great to see that you've managed to get Kamala Khan and give her a leading role. But because you're creating your own universe, are you able to go further than this to increase the kind of diversity in the heroes and in the game's cast compared to the main comic book universes? So I personally find this to be a great question, and Sean delivers a very intriguing answer to follow it up. We're all for diversity in general. I love Kamala Khan and what she represents, what she brings to the table, how she reunites these Avengers, how she's a fan just like us, and in some ways idolizes these heroes. One of the things that is important to know about the way we approach stories, and this is what Marvel is very good at. In terms of opening up that 80-year history, as long as we can ground these heroes and as long as we can place those heroes in our universe, within our story, every hero is on the table. The opportunity to see much more diversity of heroes, of storylines, of everything is kind of what we're trying to set up with this living organism. That is the AIM-dominated world that happens after the campaign. That's the foundation of where we can now create these new stories and story arcs and hero arcs. And yes, the goal is to open up the entire Marvel Universe to use that palette to draw from and place and situate in our world. And to expand that a bit more, Sean states, yes, it extends to all of the 80-year history of Marvel. The process of choosing these characters is, can we ground them in this world? Can we make a real argument to Marvel that this character belongs here? This character will move our story forward, or take us into new stories. So, it's all about how we write it, how we sell it, how we situate it, and then how we then bridge that into sort of the new threat, new escalations of threats, and etc. So to reiterate something extremely important, every single new hero that is added within the game, whether or not that be Spider-Man or Hawkeye or any other character featured down the line, will surely and solely serve that of the wider story. I don't think that we can expect random Marvel characters like that of Howard the Duck to simply pop out of nowhere, but rather every character featured within the game is solely going to focus on the main narrative and how to expand that even further. And after applying all that knowledge to a character like Spider-Man, it makes me that much more intrigued to see where his story could go from here. And even though Sean stated that Spidey will have a more self-contained story, I'm very curious to see exactly how that's going to operate when he's interacting with the other Avengers. And to provide one final piece of clarity on this whole matter, the interviewer asks, will every DLC character you release in Marvel's Avengers have their own story arc? Is that the plan? And with Sean's final statement, that is the plan. It will depend on how deep we go, but no character can be introduced without a story. That's part of the Marvel rule. So we have to have it introduced with a story arc, understand what that character is going through, and potentially what villain is creating sort of that conflict. That is how we start to delve, and then there will be sort of a major narrative payload on the direction we choose or wherever we feel like we can add a bigger storyline. The more that Sean discusses within this interview, the more it's all starting to come together. As a rather fitting comparison, think of all the characters added within the game like that of a wider spider web, where each individual thread of the web branches off into its own unique thing, but eventually it does end up interconnecting with the other threads down the line. And knowing that Square Enix have promised new characters, new regions, and overall new content to be added within the game at no additional cost for years to come, this could surely be a one-of-a-kind experience for hardcore Marvel fans, if we end up taking Sean's statements at face value. This is still one of the things I'm heavily concerned about, and I'm really hoping that the game's live service model will not let me down once we end up playing it after the game releases on launch. But seeing that Sean at least seems confident within the game's roadmap, it definitely piques my interest to see exactly what the future has in store. And knowing that one of those characters is again going to be Spider-Man just makes me extremely happy. But with all that said, everyone, that's the video I have for you today, and please let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. What did you think about this massive interview coming from Sean and Vince, and are you now more excited for Spider-Man's inclusion in Marvel's Avengers than you were already? Again, I really hope that the villain that they end up including within Marvel's Avengers relating to Spider-Man is not a character that we've already seen be featured in Spider-Man PS4. And I know for a fact that if we end up seeing characters like Green Goblin or Venom appear within this game's world, that is surely going to be a sight to behold. But until next time, everyone, thank you all so much for watching. Stay merry Marvelites and stay spectacular, Spidey fans. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy, and without further ado, peace out.
Spider-Wars! Come out and play!